It's game day as the Maple Leafs go for their 8th straight win tonight as they return home to take on the Vegas Golden Knights. We'll tee up that game and also talk a little bit about some of the team needs ahead of the NHL trade deadline. Have they changed over the course of this winning streak? We'll get into all that and more on today's edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leaf-centered podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app, use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. Welcome into the Tuesday edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast. Got a game tonight. Leafs back in action, back home after a perfect road trip, looking for their 8th straight victory. And they'll play a familiar foe, someone they played just a couple of nights ago in the Vegas Golden Knights they will host. So we'll tee that game up. We'll also get into a conversation about whether or not the team needs have changed heading into the NHL trade deadline, because I was trying to put together like a top 3 of what this team needs, and I kind of struggle because I think my mindset's different today than it was a couple of weeks ago. I'm curious to get your thoughts on it, Dave. We'll get to that in just a moment, but let's start with some kind of news and notes from practice yesterday to help tee up tonight's game against the Golden Knights. Really quickly, looks like Timothy Liljegren was not at practice, considered day to day. And it seems like if Liljegren doesn't play in this game, that's going to put the blue line kind of in a blender for this game against the Golden Knights, doesn't it, Dave?
It just shows that one injury can kind of throw your whole plan into flux, right? Especially a right shot defenseman.
Yes, the only right shot defenseman.
Yeah, the only guy who can shoot right on this team.
Yeah,
that's health. That was supposed to be healthy. Yeah, I mean, it kind of, I guess, nice that Mark Giordano is back, and you get to see him back on the practice ice, and then you see that Liljegren's not there, and you're just like, now we're kind of really glad to see Giordano back, because Lajoie was sent down right at on Sunday, so they needed Giordano to come back basically to make that kind of all work. And so, yeah, I don't know. It looked like Liljegren was laboring a little bit during that game, and it was kind of mentioned a little bit too. So I don't know what exactly this is, but considering how tough Vegas is, especially as a physical team, I think the smart choice for the Leafs would be to make sure that he gets, if he needs the game off, don't try to force it.
Yeah, it's probably going to be a smart play where it's, if he's, I mean, no one's 100%, but if he's only 60%, going into this game, maybe give him the night off, and it's a good opportunity to get Giordano kind of back into the lineup. And he's a steady Eddie professional, right? Gio is, and he's someone who you could definitely plug back into a lineup, and hopefully he can give you some quality minutes. But like I said, if he does miss, it does kind of put the roster in flux, because you had Brody and Liljegren playing some really good D together, and then you've had Benoit and McCabe playing well, and then Morgan Rielly returns, and he's been playing with William Lagesson for the last couple of games. And now if you look at the lineup from practice today, if you want to pull that up, Dave, it's completely changed. It's completely different. One injury to Liljegren, and that completely changes everything from what we've seen out of this blue line. Looks like we have I'll just pull it up here. There it is. So it looks like Rielly is going to be playing with Jake McCabe, moves up with Morgan Rielly. Brody will be playing with Simon Benoit, who moves over to the right side. And then Giordano and William Lagesson as the third pair. So it looks to me, honestly, Dave, like what this tells me more specifically is I think we're going to see TJ Brody staple to the left side. Like,
yeah.
even when they're in complete need of someone to shift over to the right if Timothy Liljegren's injured, it seems like Sheldon Keefe is, we're going to keep Brody on the left and we're going to put Benoit on the right instead.
And Benoit's done it, not
Yeah.
obviously not in a top 4 role, because when he's been playing with McCabe has been on the right, and actually McCabe seems to enjoy playing on the right. And so yeah, I
He's
mean,
done
yeah,
that throughout his career. Like, when he first got traded to Toronto, my dream pairing, I wanted to see him play alongside Morgan Riley with McCabe on the right. And for whatever reason, Keefe was not willing to flip McCabe last season. This year, they've needed him to play on the right side, and he's actually played really well. So I'm glad that we're going to potentially get a look at this lineup if Liljegren can't go. The lineup we're seeing on the screen here and that we're talking about is likely to be the way it'll be deployed.
yeah, and the big one here, I mean, you mentioned it with Brody, is that everyone I've talked to says he looks just far more comfortable on the left side.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, when a player's struggling, you got to find a way to just put him in the best position to succeed, right? And so I assume that Brody Benoit pairing is going to see quite a bit of defensive zone time. I
Yep.
guess Riley McCabe will probably do it as well, because that's why McCabe is there. So it's going to be interesting to see how the ice time is deployed and how Keefe uses that Giordano Lagesson pairing, because I don't know if they want to be using it too much, especially if that's Giordano's first game back in 10 days. I think he's getting out
Yeah.
of 10
I mean,
days.
it can get sheltered, right? Like, they're back at home now, so Keefe will
Yeah.
have last change, so he can, make sure that he's only throwing Gio and Lagesson out there against third and fourth lines. Although, they are without Jack Eichel and Mark Stone, so it's definitely a less intimidating top six than it has been in the past with those guys not in the lineup. But nonetheless, the Leafs, they'll be able to match up however they want with last change at home.
Well, that's the big one, right? Is having that change. And so, and again, this is going to be another game where you have to ask the forwards, hey, look, we're banged up again on the blue line. We're going to need you guys to pitch in a little bit more. And that's, I think, been another thing about this streak that the Leafs have been on, is that they really have played more of a team defensive approach. Now, against Colorado, I was a little concerned that there was breakdowns in coverage and odd man rushes that shouldn't have happened, but they seem to rally around situations where they need to kind of focus and be a little more aware of situations. So I'm hoping that becomes the case, because look, Vegas had such a brutal start in that first period.
Yeah.
And then in that second period, they tried to stay with it. It didn't, like, then in the third period is where they really started to pour it on. Leafs have got to be careful about that. Vegas is going to want revenge. They are going to come out just same as they did in the last game. They're going to come out hard. They're going to try their best to establish the physical presence. They're going to have to be ready for that.
Yeah, absolutely. They're going to have to be ready for it. It's not going to be a walk in the park, opening 20 minutes, kind of like it was the other night. You better believe that Bruce Cassidy is going to have his men ready to go right from puck drop in this game. Other notes from practice today: Calle Yarncroc was there. Wasn't a full participant, but was a limited participant. Sheldon Keefe said after practice that they're targeting a full return to practice next week. So, should be back in the lineup at some point in the next week or two. And then Joseph Woll was a full participant today. It looks like he's been recalled from the Toronto Marlies on his conditioning stint. And the team currently carrying 3 goaltenders. And that meant that one was getting the day off in practice today. And that was Ilya Samsonov. You think that maybe just points to him starting tomorrow or tonight rather in Vegas? Is that why?
I think so. They've tried their best to manage Samsonov's workload, especially after a game. They try not to put him in practice, and that usually means that they're leaning towards him playing, because if he wasn't playing, they'd be giving him some extra work. And now you got 3 goaltenders. You can give a goaltender a day off, right?
Yeah, you could.
Technically 4 goaltenders hanging around, but only 3 are actually options.
So there's the final piece of news from practice today that we were going to touch on Dave, you kind of teased it. Do you want to continue with the conversation? You sent me a message today that I think it was Lance Hornby who tweeted it out. What he was laying eyes on at practice today. Do you want to explain to the good listeners and viewers of this program what exactly went on with a certain goaltender at Leafs practice today?
Funny enough, like nobody even really knew until Sheldon Keefe was just like, "Oh yeah, you know that guy that everyone was saying is on Robot Island? He's taking live shots." That's Matt Murray, for those who may have forgotten that he is still around this organization. Matt Murray was actually taking live shots from, I guess, someone on the coaching staff, Curtis Sant. He's been working with Curtis Sanford. They're pleased with his progress. Now, that doesn't mean this guy is going to be around playing games down the road. It just means that he's more involved than I think we realized, right? He's been doing meetings, right, with the goalies. He's been kind of around the team, right? And so I was a little surprised to hear that, because I thought with his injury that this was going to be a very intensive rehab, but the fact that he is around might actually benefit the Leafs in a way.
Well, I think it's still part of the rehab process, right?
Yeah.
Like it's been quite a while since he had surgery, and now it's time for him to get back onto the ice and start taking some pucks. I don't think this means that he's going to be returning to action anytime soon, or at all, for that matter. This season, I would imagine that's not the case. I could be wrong, I suppose, but I think this is more so just him, trying to build his reputation back up, trying to build up and get some practice in. Like the guy's got to play at some point. If he still wants to continue his career after his contract's up at the end of the season, he's got to prove to people that he can play and that he can get on the ice. And like I said, I don't see it happening in game action this year, but at least if he can get out to some practices and take some live shots, people can lay eyes on him. Perhaps that'll lead to him getting an opportunity next year if he wants to continue his NHL career. Once he gets through this injury that he's currently on. But I wouldn't say him taking live pucks is indicative of him possibly returning to the Maple Leafs roster. I saw some people online saying, "Oh, great, there goes all the cap space that the Maple Leafs had at the deadline." Now you got to think, what if this guy returns? I would imagine they have that answer already if he was going to be back with the Leafs or not. I think that answer's probably settled in at no, he will not be. But it was an interesting kind of name. It was an interesting name to get brought up at practice today when you see Matt Murray taking shots, live shots at Ford Performance Center. All right, let's take a break. Come back. We'll tee up tonight's game, Leafs and Golden Knights, and take a peek at maybe what some of the needs are for the Maple Leafs and how many needs there are now for them with the trade deadline coming up. So we'll get into that conversation as well. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by Sleeper. It's almost the halfway point in the season, Leaf fans, and regardless of where we are in the standings, I want to remind you that you can win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports, and especially daily fantasy hockey. Because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. All you have to do is pick whether studs like McDavid or Crosby or McKinnon, Matthews, Marner, Nylander, whoever will record more or less than their sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus minus, and more in any given game, and win 100 times your bet on Sleeper. You need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, Leaf fans. You can win 100 times your cash by playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. It's Mike DiStefano and Dave Morassutti. We are your hosts here on the show. We have new episodes coming out each and every weekday, Monday through Friday. You can find them wherever you get your podcast app, whichever platform you use to download the audio versions. And also, you can find us 5 days a week up on YouTube as well. Game tonight, Leafs and Golden Knights. Toronto trying to make it 8 straight wins. Been 20 years since this team has won 8 games in a row, and they'll look to do it tonight against a pretty formidable opponent, the defending Stanley Cup champions. And this would be the second win against them over the course of this winning streak. How do you see tonight playing out, Dave?
I think, you know what, the Leafs still match up quite well against Vegas. Like, Vegas hasn't exactly played well. They're still shorthanded. Jack Eichel's on the trip, but not expected to play. Like, Vegas hasn't exactly inspired a lot of confidence. They lost to the Senators, who haven't exactly been playing very well since.
Yeah, they suck.
Yeah. Yeah, they have their Stanley Cup emotional high of the season, and now it's just back down to earth. The Ottawa Senators.
That's karma. That's what it is. It's karma, and it's worked in the Leafs' benefit and to the detriment of the Senators. But we'll move on from blasting our friends out in Ottawa. Let's continue.
Yeah. So I mean, Vegas. Do I expect Aiden Hill to have another poor performance like he did? Probably not. The guy is. Some are saying he should be in the Vezina conversation. Likely should be. He's one of the top save percentage goaltenders in the league. So
yeah, top 5 for sure.
So I think it's going to be, obviously it's going to be tougher this time around, but I still think the Leafs still have a lot, you know, they're playing it with such confidence. I'm just hoping that the return home, like, please, if you are going to this game, this team is on a 7-game win streak, the longest win streak in 20 years. Please show some excitement.
Yeah, show some love.
Show some love, especially to Morgan Rielly.
Yeah, did you see that tweet by Bonesy?
I did. That's part of the reason why I brought this up.
Yeah, Joe Bowen fired out a tweet. If no one's following Joe Bowen, I think it's Bonesy Tweets 1, I think is his Twitter handle. He said, "For the love of God, if anyone's going down to Scotiabank Arena tomorrow, make sure you cheer on Morgan Rielly, because, I mean, that to this point has been the turning point in the Leafs season. And if it turns out to go a long way here, I mean, that guy's going to deserve a lot of love and a lot of credit for what's gone on. He could potentially be like the Keith Tkachuk moments, that galvanizing moment that helped the Panthers go all the way, potentially. Maybe that, you know, the Ottawa Senators play a role here once again, and this turns out to be, you know, that moment for Toronto. We don't want to move too far ahead of ourselves, but if you are going down to Scotiabank tomorrow, roar like you've never roared before when you hear Morgan Rielly's name for the first time.
Yeah, and by the way, it's Bonesy1951 for those who are looking for how to follow Joe Bowen on X. That's exactly where you can find him.
There it is.
Yeah, like that's the Leafs play at home. We know it hasn't been good enough. 15-10-2 this season. Like, they're great on the road. 18-6-6.
Yeah, it's really mysterious how that's flipped this year. Remember last year they were terrific on the road, at home. Like, next to Boston, I think they had either the second or third best home record last year. A lot of that had to do with Ilya Samsonov, who was great on home ice. This year it's been, you know, quite inconsistent. But I was saying this on TSN 1050 earlier. I joined the station earlier today, and I was talking about how, you know, I think a big difference in why we feel more confident about the Leafs today than maybe the fan base did a month ago is because they're playing with consistency right now. You look at the course of this 7 games, and they're playing with some sort of identity. You know, like it's not just go out and let's see what happens. There's a purpose to what they're doing. And I think that it's really allowed them to stick to a game plan. And even against Colorado, yeah, they found themselves down early, but they stick to the game plans. They stick to the structure, and they, you know, were rewarded for it with a come from behind victory. I think you do a similar, you know, you go back to it again here against the Golden Knights, and you stick to it for the rest of the season, really, because it's working. This is the best the Leafs have looked in a very long time. They look very well structured. They're playing well on both ends of the ice, and they're playing with a level of consistency that we may have never even seen in like this Matthews-Marner era. I'm not talking about just Matthews and Marner because those guys have been consistent, but I'm talking about the team as a whole hasn't played with this level of consistency night in and night out for, this long of a stretch. So it's great to see it. And I think that's why this team, there's a lot more confidence this time around going up against the defending Cup champs than there might have been a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So I know people are still bullish on this Leafs team. I get it. We've seen the inconsistency from the start of the year till now, but the way that this team has been playing, it doesn't matter sometimes how your season starts. Teams that go through these ups and downs generally are better off for it when they can figure it out at the right time. Now, I've also had people say, they might be getting a little too hot.
Too early, peaking
Yeah,
too early,
peaking too early. I'm like, you know what? I appreciate the wins, right? Like I appreciate like watching a game and not, wanting to pull the rest of these little hairs on my head out. And so, like this team, we thought had no chance of being in the conversation in the Atlantic Division.
Yeah.
Now they're still 6 points behind Florida, and they're still 7 points behind Boston.
Any games in hand if you're looking at the
2 games in hand on Boston and 1 on Florida. The problem here is those darn Bruins have been picking up all those stupid overtime points.
Yeah.
That the Leafs were kind of doing. 13 overtime losses for that Bruins team this year.
I mean, you can look at it the other way, and if they were to have won, won half of those games, now the Leafs are really, really out of contention for that.
I also saw a tweet. Someone said, the Leafs had that 3-9-3 record against
against like Ottawa, Chicago, and like these terrible, crappy teams. Columbus was one of those teams as well. If they would have just been 500 against those teams, I think it's like the bottom 5 teams in the league.
So if they have a 3-9-3 record against Ottawa, Chicago, Columbus, and Buffalo.
Yeah, there you go.
If the Leafs were just 500 against those teams, they would be first in the NHL by points percentage.
And this is why we always talk about why those losses come back to bite you.
Yeah.
And people say, well, whatever. At least they beat the good teams. Yeah, that's great. But if they also beat the bad teams, they would be in a better position. Like they just would be. Like now it's a difference between, game 7 at home and game 7 on the road right now, right? Being 3 games below 500 and 500, like those 3-4 extra points makes a difference when it comes to getting a home playoff game for game 7. But I digress. That's not today's conversation, but it is just something that is always percolating in the back of my mind. Just really quickly to go back to tonight against the Golden Knights, like you look at the way that they've played recently and it hasn't been good, without Jack Eichel, without Mark Stone, who's probably done for a long while, probably the regular season. I wouldn't be shocked if he was ready to go come game 1 of the playoffs, that said. But like that's a big presence who plays a strong two-way game. Like we're talking about a Selke candidate in Mark Stone. So without him over the course of the last few games, they've given up 16 goals in their last 3 games, including 7 of which to Toronto, obviously. But this is a team that's kind of reeling a little bit defensively. They're struggling to get saves and struggling to score and keep up with teams. And they've lost now 5 of the last 6 games. So Toronto, just don't take your foot off the pedal, continue to go at this Golden Knights team. They're battered and beaten as is. Just continue to go out and do what you've been doing, play at the same level of consistency that you've been playing with over the course of the last couple of weeks, and they should be fine. They should be able to keep this win streak rolling and push it to 8. I really do believe that.
I think they should be able to, right? That's kind of the expectation now. It's kind of a good thing. It's good to have high expectations for this team, whether some people believe they should or not.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So puck drop tonight, 7:00 down at Scotia Bank Arena. Obviously on tomorrow's show, we will recap the game. But on the other side, Dave, I'm curious where your thoughts are at today compared to maybe a month ago of what this team and what their needs might be ahead of the NHL trade deadline. Because I think they've changed for me. I'm curious if they've changed for you. So we'll have that conversation next. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Our sponsor once again today is Camino Consulting. You've heard of our online families and couples course and taken advantage of the Locked On 25% discount running to the end of the month. But what about the live seminars? In both sport and business, the challenge in differentiating candidates and recruits is an endless battle. Everyone can demonstrate their measurables and qualifications, but we all know it is the intangibles that matter when those things are similar. Contact Camino Consulting for their team and management seminars to get a peek behind the curtain and watch your next recruiting class or hiring group become one of the most effective you've ever seen, both because you identified the right candidates and because you've learned how to communicate and motivate them in accord with their own preferences. But you aren't in a business management or working with a team, we pay referrals. Make some money making your workplace and favorite teams better. Every group works together better at the end of the year than they do in week one. So contact Camino Consulting at caminoconsulting.ca and get on the fast track to understanding. Welcome back to the Locked On Leafs podcast. It's Mike DiStefano and Dave Morassutti. You can find this podcast wherever you get your podcast from. We do have daily podcasts each morning, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. I almost chewed my tongue off on that one. I don't know why it was such a struggle to get that out there. I say that basically on every single podcast. But anyways, I digress. Maybe it's because I've been I was going to make a hair joke, pulling my hair. Sorry, Dave, but pulling my hair recently because I can't really find or I can't figure out what exactly the team needs are now ahead of the NHL trade deadline. Like I thought I had a pretty good grasp of, what my list was for what I wanted Brad Treliving to address heading into the trade deadline, and wanted a defenseman, wanted a third line center, I wanted another middle six winger, and at one point like a goaltender was in that conversation. And now just look at the way that the team has played the last couple of weeks. I'm not sure exactly, outside of the obvious, a top right-handed defenseman. I'm not sure there's much else that this team really needs to make sure that they upgrade on.
Well, that's the thing, right? I think you could have said a few weeks ago, like getting another center was imperative. But then you see the way that Max Domi has worked on that line with Nylander Bertuzzi. You're kind of like, okay, like that really works. Tavares is still a good center, despite what some people have said about his play this season. Like, yeah, has he been an $11 million player? No, but he's still been a really good player for them, during the stretch.
Kick ass on the third line.
He does, but hey, you know what? There's teams who have good third lines. We've been talking how much the team is a top two lines, and then nothing else happens.
Yeah,
maybe you just got to get the depth going. But now with like Calle Jarnkrok coming back, you're like, even like finding the right spot for Calle Jarnkrok in the lineup because of the way everything has been working right now.
I know.
It's like the Leafs, in my opinion, the Bobby McMahon addition has been a good problem for the Leafs. Now they have options, right? Before it's just like Noah Gregor, Ryan Reeves, like those guys were taking turns out of the lineup. And it's like, well, now there's someone else who's probably deserving to play that likely going to get the boot with Calle Jarnkrok coming back. And look, Calle Jarnkrok deserves to be back in this lineup because while he might not be the biggest offensive producer, although he is capable of it, his defensive play is what you're going to need.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
There's no doubt in my mind that Calle Jarnkrok is one of the top 12 forwards on this team. Yeah. It deserves to be in the lineup. Like you could pick somebody and take him out of the lineup that's going to be there tonight. Like if we throw it up now, I guess we could throw it back up here. Yeah, like you could easily take Ryan Reeves out of the lineup and put Calle Jarnkrok there. You could take Nick Robertson, potentially. You could have that conversation, take him out of the lineup and put him there. and move Robertson down a peg, or that conversation can be had. He certainly belongs in the bottom six. I'm with you, and I agree with you on that. But when I look at what else, like, that's an internal addition, right? Like
Yep.
that's internal. Externally, what else really could you ask Brad Treliving to go out and address that would make sense? Like, outside of maybe a second defenseman, like if you can upgrade two of your blue liners, get a couple of right hand
Mhm.
shots. I know yesterday we had talked about, or on we both kind of brought up the possibility of doing a 2-for-1 trade at the deadline and addressing the blue line majorly. I brought up Rasmus Anderson and Chris Tanev, and you brought up Adam Larson and Will Borgen, as two right-handed defensemen that could be inserted into the lineup. Outside of doing that, like, I'm not so sure, this team acquires that much more tinkering. Like, I don't know. I don't know how else, what else they could do to really improve this team. Because I think that they've actually finally found a good mix that's really working for this team right now.
Yeah, I don't see, like, I remember still, people were still bringing up goaltending. I'm like, your teams that trade for goaltending, like the only one that really needed it last year was Vegas because they had all injuries there. The Leafs have been quite they can get.
And the goalie they traded for didn't even play. Like, they
I know.
traded for Quick. He didn't play.
Funny enough, Jonathan Quick right now is what a lot of teams would take.
Yeah,
So
including the Rangers. So
yeah,
they're gonna hang on to him.
they are gonna hang on to him. And so, like, yeah, I just don't see. Yeah, you can make a case to add maybe a little more. Like, some people want to go out and add size to the lineup. Sure, you can go and do that, but why wait? Why waste the assets on that? I still think the blue line, if they can just focus on even addressing the depth of this blue line, because now with Liljegren out, we don't know if or when Connor Timmins is going to be coming back. He's likely even going to be a guy that they move
And
for salary.
he's just
Like,
nobody I'm even considering, anyways.
I don't
Like,
even know if I don't even know if I even want Connor Timmins to play unless it's like your last option out there,
yeah, like,
right?
I don't consider him part of this team. Like, I'll be
No.
honest with you, at
He-
least when I think about what a playoff lineup could look like, if he's on the Leafs playoff roster, something has gone wrong. Like, there are many, many
unfortunate
injuries.
Unfortunately, maybe the right decision would have been to see if you could have gone something for him during preseason. See if a team would have, a team that needed a blue liner would
Yeah,
have
but
given
Dave,
you
he looked like Cale Makar during the preseason.
do it.
And he got hurt. He got hurt in the
I know.
preseason. That's the problem. The guy can't stay healthy. That was his issue when he was in Colorado, carried with him over to
Mhm.
Arizona, and now here in Toronto. It is unfortunate for him. But I think ultimately, Liljegren's an interesting player for me. I think there's probably an upgrade there. Like, if you look at the lineup that we've seen over the course of the last couple of weeks, like, Liljegren could be upgraded on, and so could William Lagesson.
Yeah.
Outside of those two players, I'm not sure I see, an area of weakness at this point for Toronto where it's like, gotta go and get that guy. Like, in previous years, you've seen it's like, okay, Noel Chari would plug a hole, right? Like, Ryan
Ryan
O'Reilly
O'Reilly.
would definitely enhance this team and plug a hole. And don't get me wrong, I mean, could you find an upgrade, a better second line center than Max Domi? Probably. Like that. Yes. Could you? Of course you could. But is it a necessary move? Like last year, Ryan O'Reilly felt necessary. I don't know if upgrading, one of your top three centers is necessary this season. The way that fourth line has started to play the last couple of weeks, or last few games rather, that's solid. They've got something here in Pontus Holmberg, David Camp, and dare I say it, Ryan Reeves, man. He's playing some good hockey right now with those guys. I was
Yeah.
just digging into the numbers, Dave. He leads the Leafs over the course of this winning streak. He's played 5 of the 7 games. He leads the team in expected goal differential and I think scoring chance differential as well. Um, yeah, like it's and expected goals against, leading a team and expected goals against over the course of this winning streak. So it's impressive what the fourth line has done too. So it's like there's not much you want to tinker with there because you finally found a good mix and a good nucleus.
Yeah. Right. And that was the issue last year that many were like, a lot of changes that were made. Is it going to mess with the chemistry? Right. They went from a team that had quite a bit of offense to a team that actually subtracted from its offense. Right. So you have to be careful with the balance of your lineup, the chemistry, obviously. Like even Bertuzzi, like I don't know if you've noticed, Bertuzzi and Domi have shown some, they've shown good chemistry even off the ice. I think Domi's been posting a lot of stuff on social with Bertuzzi. That's got a lot of Leaf fans really happy. Like,
And those guys, and the way that they've played recently, like you can even look at that as a trade deadline addition.
yeah,
Like this is Tyler Bertuzzi, not the guy we've seen over the last couple of weeks or the last couple of months. This is the Tyler Bertuzzi that the Leafs thought that they were getting. This is a nice addition to the team, the real Tyler Bertuzzi, assuming he can continue this. And you can say the same for Max Domi and Bobby McMahon. They're getting a lot of internal additions, I guess you could say, which has completely changed my mind in how active, I guess, Tree Living will have to be, which means he can go all in on one piece, one big blue liner, because he doesn't have to spread it around and tinker around the edges. He can just go out, get yourself a guy who can play top pair, top 4 minutes, right side rugged, whether it's Tanev or whoever it might be, maybe Rasmus Anderson, Adam Larson, you mentioned, whoever it possibly could
yeah.
be, but go out and get yourself a solid player, and then just kind of let things play out as is up front with the forward group that's playing really well right now.
And that's how I would go about it. There's, what the pressing need is. Focus on that. There are options. Yeah, you may have to pony up a little bit, but guess what? The reason why you pony up for that is because you feel good in everything else that your roster has.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So maybe a couple defensemen. You get yourself a top pair defenseman and maybe a depth defenseman, third pair guy. But outside of that, man, there's a team that's already there and built and ready to go. I mean, they just went and rolled through Vegas last week. They'll play them again this week. They beat Colorado. They beat some good teams recently, and they're showing that they are most definitely cup contenders built as is. So you add a couple additions to that blue line, should be ready to go, ready to
And
rock, ready to roll.
it's a critical week. We have, we're a week and a half away from the trade deadline. This is where, management make their final decisions at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. So we'll see what happens. Maybe over the course of the week, things go absolutely ice cold and we have different opinions come trade deadline.
Yeah,
But recency bias with 7 straight wins, with everyone seemingly playing at their highest capabilities over the course of this 7-game stretch too, things look pretty good right now in Leafland. I'm not sure how much I'd want to change it up, but that's the beauty of podcasts and fandom. We can change our minds, and we probably will between today and next Friday's 3 p.m. trade deadline. But that's a conversation for another day. We'll wrap things up today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on X at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morassutti, and follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. Go ahead, smash that like button if you're watching on YouTube. Leave a comment down below. What are your thoughts? What do you think? Is there upgrades to be made? How many trades do you think that the Leafs need to make to put this team in a position to compete for a Stanley Cup? Is it 1, 2? Is there a few? Let us know in the comment section down below or reach out to us on Twitter. We'll be back with another episode for you guys tomorrow to recap tonight's game. Leafs and Golden Knights. Go Leafs go. Until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.